The Hampton Bay San Marino. It's a ceiling fan light kit. A lot of parts here involved. It's a lot of assembly before we start mounting. But generally speaking, it's something you would put in a ceiling mount, and you got to make sure that there's reinforcement in there, and there is. Okay, this has previously had one of a different style, so we're working on the mount. And here we have assembly of the fan blades. Obviously, with the wood grain is going to be facing what will be the down position. And there's a lot of rubber bushings in here, and even though this is metal and metal, you really want to avoid using a power tool on this. The rubber bushings and little washers will act as a lock washer. Don't use an impact on these things. Just kind of hand tight with a hand screwdriver is the way this will go for pretty much all of the major assembly on this. And one thing to look out for when you're tightening these down is a lot of times as you tighten one, the other one will start feeling looser because of the way the slots go straight down. So once everything's together, this is a lot like tightening a wheel lug nut set. Is we just go around and we hand tighten the rest. Again, don't go crazy about tweaking them super tight, because this type of stuff, it is possible to damage it. And absolutely positively do not use a power tool on this. Once we get all these things, firm but not tweaked or stripped or messed up, we're going to continue the rest of the assembly process. This part here, I got to see whether or not that comes off. It's not incredibly clear in the instructions, but I'm thinking I want this to go away just because it's flammable. It really shouldn't be inside of the electrical housing. There's a lot of other pieces here to deal with, and when we look at this, we need to make sure that we're not prematurely assembling something and then finding out that it needed to be off before everything gets mounted on the ceiling. The other thing that can run into an issue here is to make sure that stuff is not stripped out, little mounting holes up there. So we're going to go over that next. One reason I cover the camera here is to protect the privacy of the person who I'm helping out with this. So anyway, we'll continue with the assembly. I believe it's possible to assemble this with or without the lights, but this particular installation we're doing it with the lights. Here we have the light holder assembly and the electrical thing here that's built onto the fan. Now, there's a couple of switches here, and it's probably better to explain while this is down. This little switch controls whether or not the fan spins clockwise or counterclockwise when it's set up. It has to do whether you want it to have a cooling effect in the room or a little bit of a warming effect by taking the heat that rises up and pushing it back down. The electrical connections here look complex, but basically at the installation level, it's just the two wires. And fortunately, they're labeled, so they'll say exactly which one attaches to which. So you shouldn't have any polarity problems hooking these up. The actual switching here is done with the little chains, and then there's attachment, kind of a clever little system for attaching these. We're not going to do this until the end of the installation, but basically you snap the links together and you have two toggles, one for controlling the fan and the other for controlling the light. And then of course controlling the direction of the fan, you have to get up on a chair or a small ladder, and that's kind of a seasonal switch that you would be doing on that. But here we connect wires, we make sure everything gets connected here. And again, that would be a question of whether somebody's doing it without the light and then it goes like this, or with the light and we attach here. Similar in some ways to the MC4 connectors we'll see on solar panels. It's like a bullet connector inside of a plastic connector. Just got to make sure it goes in all the way, and that's that. And then as we put this together, notice there's a lot of excess wire, so getting that all to fit is a little tricky. I can't do it while holding the camera. These screws are just here for storage as part of the packaging. They have to be removed entirely for this to get installed onto there. If you're just going with the cap, they have to be removed entirely and then the cap installed. But either way it goes, these screws are here just for packaging. There's no way you're going to get that on there without totally removing those screws. You have to look out for that switch. There's a little notch here for clearing that switch. And again, as we get everything together, we're going to make sure we're not pinching or cutting any of the wires. Get part handled off camera. Making room inside of the housing for everything to fit is a little tricky. And you want to make sure you've got free movement and everything. But you got to get these holes lined up to get the screws back in. And watch out for clearance. You got to shift a couple little things around in there to get it, but don't use any serious force on that or it's possible to cause damage. Screws started. You don't want to tighten them down until you have all three in place, because if you really tighten one, it's probably going to misalign the other holes. And we want to try to keep this thing more or less balanced so you don't have much fan wobble, or hopefully no fan wobble at all when everything's moving. And assembly ready to deal with the top. We don't install this stuff until it's basically up in its housing. But going over the other parts, got to make sure we get this in the right sequence. And again, this needs to come back apart. This was just assembled for shipping so that you know where all the screws go. Zigzag arrangement on 2 of the screws, but not the other 2. These are the ones that you can actually leave in this housing so that when this gets installed to the ceiling, lifting the entire assembly into place and getting everything mounted will hopefully go a little bit easier. The trick is that these have washers on there, and you want to make sure the washers don't end up in there and making things a little harder to deal with. But we'll get to that part in a minute. Now, normal polarity on a lot of stuff is going to be, black is positive on AC installations, white is negative. But when you have a device that's basically got more than one electrical connection in it, and it's not a 220 device, you've got 2 positives. And that's where you start getting into more color-coded wires. So on this, the black is going to control the fan, the blue controls the lights. Because the installation is a single switch installation, but you could make this with a double switch installation where there's a wall switch which controls the fan and the lights separately. They provide separate wires. On this sort of a thing though, we're going to end up taking both positives, putting them together, and then having it installed. One of the reasons for the extra length on this is because one guy's got to hold everything up while the other guy's putting it through. So with this part taken apart, the wires have to be fed through the middle of the shaft, but we also have to have these things in place. And part of that I'm not going to be able to cover in a video because I have to hold the camera, and the guy I'm working with, he's going to be holding the light while I do this. Neither one of us can be holding the camera. It's also where the installation on something like this, it's possible to do it as a one-man job, but it really becomes a two-man job. There are some screws to back out, and then some holes to line up. Kind of hard to do it holding the camera with one hand, and I've got to get this thing done pretty quick. But what we're going to do is we're going to insert this pin to get this thing mounted. But we also have to be aware of the fact that when we're working up here, this ball joint has to go into a slot here, and the wires still have to be able to pass through the middle. We don't really want to have to put them on the side. But this whole upper section doesn't spin, it's the lower section that spins. So there's a couple of ways to work with that. Okay, so with this plate attached there, you want to make sure it's nice and firm and secure. And then to attach this, it's either a two-man job having another guy hold this up, or we have it at the top of a ladder, where there's enough slack to attach all the wires, and that's the next stage. Okay, and then with the cover wrestled in place, we have that. And here's what's going on: is this hole was cut for a larger light assembly, so there's not much of a way to deal with that except putting another plate up here, which we're going to avoid. So next is testing the system, but of course we got to put the rest of the cover bolts in here too. Okay, last stage of this, we've tested it, we're making sure everything's working. The little basket style light things, they're kind of decorative, but they also help diffuse the light. They just get kind of pushed and twisted into place with little slots on those. But if they ever loosen up, then what happens is the bulbs hold that, and we got to make sure there's no packing foam in there. So you'll see how that little slot thing goes. You just kind of put those in and twist them. Again, we're not trying to gorilla tighten anything, and then when the bulb goes in, that thing won't come all the way off. So we're going to get these all in, and we just kind of firmly put them in. We don't go gorilla tight with anything. And so with everything running, this is how we check it. This particular one is on a dimmer switch, so you know, if the wobble gets too bad, there is a little kit involved where so we can kind of adjust the balance on the blades. The thing is, the instructions that come with it talk about leveling it with the ceiling, which can sometimes get a little tricky if the ceiling isn't level. But the you test both switches. There's our switch for reversing the direction of the fan. We just want to make sure that with that turned up, can you turn that up all the way? And then we're going to make sure it's not like developing a real wobble.
You have to turn it up all the way with this switch here.
Oh, okay.
It says the different speeds.
Yeah.
That's.
I think that was off, and then there we go. Yeah, that's full speed.
That.
And then we just want to make sure it doesn't develop a wobble. There, it's kind of evening itself out. So I think we're good to go. All right.